What do we care about more, pageantry or proficiency? We're going to talk about it on the other side. Welcome back to another episode of South Star Classroom. Hopefully the lovely Jubilee will be joining us later, but we got David, we got Omar, I am Charles, and let us hop right into just checking in with people. You know what I'm saying? Omar, who is having fun like a child, let's start with him.
Always, man.
Brother, what is new with you?
Man, I am always just happy-go-lucky to be like a child, man. Come on, man. Like, is that childhood imagination that drives the innovation of America, baby. I'm all right, man. I am tired. I am burnt out. I'm exhausted. Like, I need somewhat of a break. Summer's usually like one of the busiest times because it's this like tiny sliver of time, ladies and gentlemen, where like the school year ends, and in between the school year ending and the school year beginning, it's like, so did what we do work, and what complete redesigns do we need to do, and what analysis do we need to do? And I'm like really adamant about everybody planning the entirety of the school year, all major events, all projects, all deadlines, all by June. Because I'm like, dude, I don't want you thinking during the year. I want you executing. So, it's good. David's been on a couple calls with us lately, dude, hanging out, listening to all the academic stuff that we got going on. So I'm with you, Charles. I'm a little tired, man. How you feeling, brother?
I'm good, man. Same. Little tired, you know what I'm saying? But we'll let the beard of knowledge, the beard of wisdom check in first. How you doing, young David? I love that artwork pieces. We got to name that piece. You know what I'm saying? I know it probably has a name, but it's like South Star Classroom fancy at this point.
Yeah, it's part of the lore. Good afternoon. Doing well. Definitely transitioning into summer mode. Things are slowing down a bit, and that's good. And starting to transition into, kind of the next school year and figuring out, identifying what the needs are of my clients. And yeah, it's good. It feels like, it's not quite like ending a regular school year as an administrator or teacher, but we kind of work on that same flow. And so that's what's happening. But yeah, looking forward to diving into this topic today.
Yeah, man. And I'm going to actually throw it to you to let you introduce the topic. I know we've been talking about it, but you set it up so well for us. I've been good, man. I had a lot of travel. We had our Philly New Niagara event. It was really cool. And we had a really good turnout. Shout out to Sharif and everybody that came out. The Boys Latin Charter School for hosting us. And then from there, had a talk on this documentary in Atlanta. So, just had to have a 5 a.m. flight from Philly to Atlanta. That was always fun. So did that, quick turnaround, did the talk that night, came back next day, right back at it, and then right back into this work. But working on some really exciting stuff, some of which, again, David has been on the calls with, So, David, you are the common denominator between our productivity, brother. So it's only right that you introduce what the hell we're talking about today.
Man, what are we talking about today?
We are talking today about we're going to focus in on two different regions, but so we're going to talk about Oakland, and we're going to talk a bit about San Diego school district. And what we're talking about is looking beyond the grades, right? Pageantry or proficiency. And what we mean here is we're looking at two major school systems that have, I would say, graduation rates that are, generally pretty high. Mm-hmm. Even UC in California, like, students graduating in high numbers with the appropriate credits to be admitted to our state university system, which if you look at is could be a good thing. But then when we look at at test score data, we see a big disconnect. So we see large numbers of students graduating, large numbers of students ending up in four-year or community colleges, and the big issue is that they are not academically prepared. In some cases, we see gaps as high as, maybe 100% graduation rate. But when you look at proficiency for the same group, it might be upwards of like 10% or 20% for math or for English language arts. So significant gaps there. And that's what we're talking about at the high level. I think, Charles, you're going to jump into some of the Oakland work that you've been doing, and I can cover, what I've been observing down here in San Diego. So we're talking about the gap between proficiency, meaning like on some kind of an assessment, versus the high numbers that we are seeing in and around the pageantry and celebration of high numbers of students graduating.
Yeah, man. I mean, wherever you want to start, man, you tee it up, brother. You've been captain today. So where would you like for us to start the convo?
Yeah, let's why don't you break down what your research showing for Oakland?
Yeah, man. So, one here, let me go ahead and try to get it up on the screen. Oh, you know what? I don't think it will let me. So you might have to do it. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yep, I got you.
I think I'm frozen, but I'll just keep talking.
Okay.
So basically, and I just updated my OS. I'm doing the beta, so don't do betas on your main computer. This is one of the lessons there. But basically, we wrote this report in Oakland called, proficiency over pageantry. And the ultimate breakdown was there's a lot of young people that's doing really well as far as school, as far as the grades are concerned. And in that piece, like they're getting A's and B's, they're on the honor roll. And some of those, we talked to about 350 students. 80% of those students thought they were proficient in math and English. When the numbers came out, it was more like 1 in 5, like 2 in 10 was the level of proficiency. And so, those numbers just were not adding up. There's a lot of young people that are thinking that they're doing really, really well. And I'm kind of going through this pretty quickly. But when those students started to see that and learn about that data, they were pretty upset, because what they learned is that they might be thriving in their class. But the work that they're getting might not even be on par. So for instance, you got a 9th grader who has all A's and B's, and then they find out they're not proficiency in literature and language arts. Then they go look at the work and they ask somebody, and it's like, oh, well, this is 7th grade work. And who is that helping? You know what I mean? Because I think we've been trained to care a lot about what grades are. And I know those are something that was really important to me, but I think that it was just really interesting listening to these young people. I'll just do this really quick, because not to be super long-winded, but it's enough data to get you guys going. So teachers were not informing students of their grade level. We asked teachers, we asked those students if somebody had ever talked to them about what if they were on grade level in math or in ELA, and like 2 out of 10 of those kids said yes. Students were not aware that they were chronically absent. Most of the young people we talked about thought that they had really good attendance. Chronic absenteeism in California is defined as missing 10% or more school days, right? Like that number was crazy there. And then a lot of students, for the most part, thought that their teachers handled their class as well, but when they didn't, like they had no faith that their teachers could manage their classrooms, and then trust the administrators to fix the problem, meaning that a lot of our students were saying, I want to learn, I'm here to learn, but if you're not going to, if you're not going, oh, sorry about that, David. If you're not going to handle this classroom, if it's not safe for me to learn here, if every time I raise my hand, I become a target of bullying or getting beat up or something like that, then why would I keep raising my hands? So that's what we did in Oakland. We've gotten a few interviews. We've done some stuff with Brightbeam. There are some blogs up. And then we did the Oakland Post. And the Oakland Post, I don't know if I told you this, David. I'll take this down off the screen. And we'll bring you in a second, Omar. But David's going to get a kick out of this. You know, the Post showed up to the event. They watched these kids present. Most of these kids that presented, their teachers were there to support them. So I'm talking to the people at the Post, and they say this feels like a hit piece on teachers. And I said, why would it be a hit? Where did you get that from? Like, these young people are saying we're not getting quality. We want something better. Those adults are in the building supporting them. Why is it that you would try to turn that into something? And David can speak well. And I respect the Post for their longevity and for Paul Cobb, who came up with Huey P. Newton and what he built. And he also went to Lafayette like I did. But they tend to have a really strong link and bond with the unions. And let's just say that the education writers are not always the most unbiased of people when it comes to this, especially when some of the kids that were presenting came from charter schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think, maybe I think people in general, especially with the Post or other kind of, I wouldn't say left-leaning, but more like liberal-minded media are definitely sensitive around the issues of education, especially when you get down to talking about like brass tacks and like numbers and data, right? You're like, this is just the data. This is there are some students are telling their stories, but and then we're going to look at some San Diego data, which is pretty appalling. But I think people do tend to get defensive and say like, this is anti-teacher. When in reality, I think what the data is telling us and the stories are telling us is that, for whatever reason, teachers don't have access to the resources to be able to effectively, support their students, right? And so they move them along, call it social promotion. There's different words for it. But at the end of the day, we are sending young people off into the world unprepared. We talked last week about being unprepared for the world of work. And now we see young people. I
wish I could have been in that conversation.
Oh my gosh.
I wish.
Great. We're looking at young people going into community college or four-year university that are like they're going to get shocked, right? And we know what happens. You fail a couple of classes, you panic, and you drop out. That's the reality. So I'll leave it there. I'd love to hear what Omar's thoughts are on this Oakland research that Charles has done.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of thoughts, and I've got, clearly I've got comments for every single one of the trajectories that we have. I will say this, like, here's a quick little anecdote. So I wound up, I'll try to be a little vague, even though like I'm in El Paso, so you could kind of put two and two together. I met with the dean of education for a prominent university here in El Paso, and dude was cool. Like it went really well. I was actually really pleasantly surprised with how it went. One of the comments that he made without kind of, and I think it's kind of public knowledge, and I'm not trying to throw anyone under the table here, and I'll be diplomatic about it, is that he was very excited about our willingness, CPLA's willingness to share data. So you can kind of put two and two together. If he was very excited about our transparency with data, then you can kind of assess like, well, what's going on with the local school districts, and maybe his excitement for us would translate to something else, right? And what I think that means is that you start going into school districts across the country, and this discussion of like, oh, it's a slight on the teachers. Look, like teachers are working their behinds off, and they have a lot to deal with, right? They're contending with phones, they're contending with parents, they're contending with administration that may not be like super supportive. So I'm really like on pro teacher side. But what I find is that school districts and teachers and organizations that don't have any adherence to the data, and they're like, well, test scores aren't everything. I'm like, look, cool, they aren't in terms of like funding, but how about literacy levels? Like, and if you're not able to tell a parent your child is at this literacy level or this proficiency level, and like this is going to mean their future ability to read or not, this is not an overcorrection of the data. I see that these folks who are very against this are on the other direction of an overcorrection of like, we shouldn't have any kind of data now. And I'm like, whoa, hold on for a second. And this is something that I feel very passionately about because I'm a huge proponent of what's called proficiency-based grading. So what that means for our audience is that grades, instead of it being like, I don't know, an 89, a 79, a 67, like what's the difference between like, I don't know, a 72 and a 78? Other than 6 points, like, can anyone tell me the actual difference? It's super subjective. And I think grading is bullshit. It's super subjective. I would much rather have like a 1 to 4, 1 to 5 scale, right? One being like did not meet, two being like approaches proficiency, three being meets, four being masters. And a kid gets a 1 through 4. And people were like, well, I don't understand that grading system. I'm like, yeah, because the grading system that exists sucks. Do you even like, well, I know an A is good. But does it mean that the child has learned? And does it mean that your child has garnered a proficiency level where they are literate or not? It's so subjective because a grade in one school in Oakland can mean a radically different thing from another school in Oakland. But if you started getting more onto proficiency-based grading, where it's like, yeah, like you're really at the state standard with masters or meets or approaches, that gives the child a much more transparent view of what needs to be achieved. And I think lying to a child is not a good thing. Like, how do y'all feel about lying to a child and be like, you're good, I want to bolster your self-esteem, here's a B, instead of being like, damn, we need to improve, you need to read. I'd much rather that kid become literate and navigate the world than have a false sense of excellency. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So I'm with you all on this one, man, but I want to be careful about kind of getting into the blame of teachers, because if teachers were being supported the way that they should, being given the resources that they need, really getting into much more database practices with excellent leaders, I don't know if we'd be having this conversation, man.
Well, can we stay there for a little bit, David? I mean, I know you're
absolutely. Yeah. Yep.
Like, my thing wasn't about like bashing teachers. Actually, I don't think teachers are. My focus on this is the students and where they are and if they're being failed or not. I think if you're somebody that is being honest with students and honest with families and are at the top of your craft or driving to get better at your craft, I don't think you're offended by any of that stuff. I think you're like, yo, like, yeah, that's right. Like, we need to kind of be doing this. I think that the same thing that is victimizing students in the sense of where students think that they're performing better, I think bad administrations have bad teachers think that they're performing better than what they are. I don't know. You know, ask some of these guys when the last time their classrooms have been audited. Like, ask them like the last times that somebody's kind of looked at their curriculum and said, yo, this isn't up to standard. Like, you know, like, hey, how well are you scaffolding this information since you have multiple levels of students in this room? And I also think that we got to start doing schooling different. I think, you know, not to gamify everything, but again, there should be a way in today's society with the way technology is and algorithms or whatever the case is, where students can kind of, if students are rising up at their own pace, they should be able to go with that. There should be, you know, the same way video games do this well. If you suck in like an adventure game, the game automatically goes a little easier to get you through and help you out. And if you're killing it, some games they get harder, right? To kind of match the level. I think that we're using some of our best technology on mindless video games and not applying it even to like education, right? So it's less about the teacher for me, Omar, in that sense. I do think if you're a teacher and a student or parent asks you what their grade level is and you can't get an answer back to them within a reasonable amount of time, I do think that is somewhat of an indictment on your ability to kind of do your job at a high level. I think that's part of it. Not bashing anybody.
Right. No, I'm with you. I'm with you, man. And I think what is being said and how I feel about this is that if again, like, I go back to the top, right? Like, I'm very much a believer that people are like, it's all grassroots. People are like, it's all from the top. I'm like, if those two aren't working concurrently together, you have a very faulty system. Not everything should come from the top and not everything should be from the grassroots. It really should be a cooperative system in like best case scenario. But I think if teachers are working in a situation where leadership is not supporting them, working with them, training them, getting them on par with really solid practices, because it's just like, whatever, Like, we're just going to come in here and like take care of the babies. Like, that's terrible leadership. Like, I'm all for taking care of the babies, but like taking care of the babies should involve like practices to ensure that they're walking out literate. Teachers are inundated with so much shit
Yeah.
that, hey, yeah, I'm with Bill. Like, yes, dude, they are deeply underprepared. And like, I have a huge stake in figuring out teacher education, because I think teacher education across the country is just like a cash cow for a lot of places, and just teaching bullshit theoretics. Like, none of this is like practical, right? But on the other hand, like, how are these administrators prepared? It's a different era. And when I say that is that, like, I've had so many conversations about management recently. And part of that management discussion is that like teacher coaching is such a unique and important utensil in working with teachers to improve their work. So when I look at like poor results, I'm not just looking at the teachers and being like, what are the teachers doing? And I'm not just looking at the kids and being like, are these things substandard? I'm looking at the whole system and saying, this must come from somewhere. Like, I was just watching the show Fallout, badass show, by the way.
Mhm.
And there's like chaos. One of the quotes was like, chaos ensues, but someone's always behind the wheel. And I thought it was such a great quote, because like, who's behind the wheel here of like not doing enough to ensure that students are at a proficiency level that's going to get them profoundly prepared for life, man. And I think that interplays with everything else that we're talking about here, from like classroom management to communications to systems. I'm like, teachers should walk into a place where systems are really well built. We shouldn't have to rely on teachers to build systems that leadership should have done in the first place, right? So I'm with you all. I just want to say that like, we spend a lot of time focusing on what teachers can do, and I spend a lot of time thinking about what organizations can do to make the lives of teachers easier and better and prepare them more.
Yeah, there's a lot said there. I think, let's see, and again, I'm also not like, this is not this sentiment is not coming. I'm not coming at teachers sideways. I think everybody has a role. I think the role of the administrator obviously is super key, because otherwise we're going to be looking at bad data all day long, all year long, and teachers are going to be scrambling, not even really knowing how to address the challenges. That's where administration comes in. That's where your instructional people come in, right? But it does remind me of a story. And this is a real life story. California, and Charles knows this. California used to have what was called an exit exam, right? The California High School Exit Exam. It was an exam that students took in the 10th grade. And if you didn't pass it, you got 2 more years to take it, right? But it was essentially an 8th grade level assessment. But you did need to pass it in order to, receive official
A diploma.
Diploma, right? You could get like a modified certificate, but I mean, it was an 8th grade test, period. And so, and it was mandatory, and our students took it at the charter school. And it wasn't the role of the teachers to say, hey, this assessment's here. How are we going to align our curriculum to it? We did that as administrators, right? We put a plan together, provided resources, provided training, looked at curriculum, and made sure that whatever content was on that assessment was embedded into our 9th and 10th grade curriculum, right? And then we also instituted after school online lab tech preparation. So students were working on an online program, also preparing for the assessment. We had the highest CASE, that's the name of the assessment, passing rates in the city of Oakland for any public charter or district school. Our students were passing at almost 100%. And of those, about 70 were passing with the highest mark, because you could pass it. There was a low bar and there was a high bar. And so one year we went up for the renewal for the high school, and we were showing our data to the school board in Oakland. And one of the board directors just couldn't he didn't even understand that there was a difference between passing and being highly proficient. So we had to break down the assessment to them. So even as a school board member in a large system, they didn't even know about this assessment that well. And then they were just blown away that we could get the results that we were getting. And they asked how we did it. And we told them, we're like, it's not rocket science, but it does require that you support your teachers and you support your students. You provide time, you provide resources, and students can achieve. And our students did achieve. California has since gotten thrown that assessment out. And so we actually, now we're just talking about 11th grade. I don't know if you know, Omar, in California, this assessment data that we're going to be looking at for San Diego next is only 11th grade data. They take it once in 11th grade in California, the statewide assessment. Yeah. And it ain't pretty.
Well, man, let me.
So they take it. They take it out.
Go ahead. You're good. I was just taking something off the screen so he could put up the other data.
No, I got like a phone call right in the middle of the show. My bad. So really quick question. So like they take it at 11th grade to give them another shot to pass in like 12th grade?
No. So this is so we don't even have an exit exam anymore. The state got rid of that probably 10 years ago or something.
Because kids couldn't pass it. They were embarrassed. They were embarrassed,
yeah,
and they just got rid of it.
Must be a bad assessment. Yeah, right. It's like, yeah, I got bad legs. No, you're just drunk. Okay, so we have a statewide assessment. It's our regular standardized test, but students only take it in the 11th grade currently in California. So if we want an assessment of how well students are doing academically in California, pretty much have one data point.
Got it.
I'm sure in Texas, you guys take it like 3 times a year or something like that. Or at least
so they're moving in a different direction. Yeah, like the state assessment, which is the STAR, is something that's done basically like in middle school from 8th grade down. They take it in 5th grade, they take it in 8th grade. I mean, you're taking the STAR almost every single year, sadly, mostly in reading and math, but at least it's like a data point, right? Like we as a school do multiple data points. However, and you get into the high school, it used to be something nuts, like 16 end of credit exams that you had to take in order to like graduate from high school. And they kind of calibrated that back down to 5. So you've got to pass these 5 EOCs, end of course exams, like Algebra 1, Biology, English 1, English 2, and then US History at 11th grade. You got to pass those 5 to graduate from high school.
Wow.
Yeah. It is what it is. And like ultimately I agree with the state in that they're trying to up the rigor of the standards to get more into like college level work, which is kind of where I wish everyone would be at in terms of their reading level. There's a lot of fight about that. The thing that we're talking about on this show is that there's the fight between people that are like, these standards are way too high and kids aren't going to pass this, so you're just ultimately failing everybody. The other side is like, well, we have to increase standards and rigor because we're doing so terribly in terms of our literacy or math scores. And I've got to, like, I'm usually in the middle of this saying, yeah, like we need to up the rigor, but it's hard to do that work and ensure that we're, bolstering particularly low income populations when like you withhold funding. And people are like, money isn't everything, but like money buys tutors, money buys programs, money buys the ability to like extend the school day to provide that tutoring. And those are expensive resources, particularly to help the most needy populations. It's always funny because I look at like recommendations, and most recommendations from like state agencies, man, like they're so generic. And people just give the most generic ass recommendations like they've never been in a school before. And it's like, yeah, dude, like up rigor. I'm like, cool. Like, how are you then going to implement strategies to ensure that like a first grader is having a significant level of rigor? And then what happens with a kid that comes in from out of the country? Like they come in like at an English level of like first grade and they're in the 7th grade. What do you do there? So there's a lot to this, but I think that the side that constantly screams of like, we need to like lower rigor needs to come to terms with like, I'm all for not testing our kids to death, and I'm all for alternative demonstrations of intelligence and assessment. But I'm also all for like, if a kid can't read and a kid can't write, you're condemning that kid to poverty. So like, let's meet in the
Yep.
middle here, because these two
Yep.
sides need to reconcile where they're at, because it's ridiculous, dude. And it's just like
Yep.
leaving kids behind and shit, man. You're just like, you're playing fucking garbage pail kids with like real children's lives, and this ain't a game. It's just real.
And David, I know you got data to show. I just wanted to just comment on what you were saying there. Oh, like, listen, man, like education is one of the most, let's see how everybody feels. And let's have a meeting about the meeting, like, so we don't offend adults, as opposed to how do we serve young people. And again, I wrote a whole dissertation talking about vulnerable people of no, not people of color, vulnerable Black people, vulnerable Black students, right? Like, and it's because they're vulnerable. Like the level needs to be where it needs to be. Listen, man, I gotta drink this big ass tub of water, right? Because I've just gotten too big. Like I had to restart my gym stuff, right? Like the same way, David, when we go out, you're like, hey, I gotta go run these laps because you want to be here for your family. Like I'm Black and diabetes runs in my family. I have to lose some weight, and I want to get back to where I want to get to what I know I can. My calories and weight and gym routine doesn't care how I feel. It doesn't care, like it doesn't have these proclamations about people of color. It's like, you either gonna run these miles or you not. You know what I'm saying? I think if we say we love these people, if we say we love the most at risk people, then stop watering that, like prepare them for the world, prepare them for life. And again, this makes these overinflated grades make a lot of adults feel good. It gets a lot of adults accolades and awards. You know what I'm saying? Like, but you got to take a baseline. You got to take an assessment. At some point, everybody here has been at a gym. You got to do that first step on the scale where you don't want to see the number. You don't want to see your BMI. You don't want to see your levels. You know what I'm saying? But that gives you a place to start, and then we can work from there. How are we going to fix education for the people that is most vulnerable if we are too afraid to even do the baseline assessment to see where we are? Like if we're in the education business, and meaning that we're supposed to be smart and thoughtful, and we're not being that. And the people that suffer the most are the people we claim that we want to serve and protect the most. David, I didn't mean to have that soliloquy, bro, but I was just
no, it's okay.
Just
let's take some blood work. Do you want to do some blood work?
Let's do it, man. Pull it up.
All right. Okay. So we're going to look at now. So Charles focused on some of the work and research that he's done at looking at some of these gaps in Oakland. Now we're going to look at another much larger school system, San Diego Unified. And this is I'll show you the title here. This is pretty fascinating. So this is the Voice of San Diego. They're a local. I want to give them a shout out because they're kind of like the local independent media voice, and they actually do a really good job of covering education issues in the San Diego area. And this reporter Jacob McWhinney is he's a good one. So he's put together. They looked at data across the school district, and I'll show you what it looks like. We're just going to look at the data. So this is exactly what we're talking about. You can see this. This is fascinating. These are high schools on the left. And what we have here is we're looking at math right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is, again, going back to the earlier point, Omar, this is only junior information because only juniors take the standardized assessment in California. And so with this data they're looking at is they're just looking at grades, right? So the percent, so let's, for example, at Canyon Hills High School, 30% of the students were proficient in math, but upwards of almost 80% were passing. Do you see that? You see how to read this? Yeah. So from left to right, and going down to, like, let's see, Lincoln High School. See Lincoln here in the middle. Lincoln is in an area of San Diego. It's highly, Latino, African American, and Asian, low income. Look at the gap here. For 11th grade mathematics classes, 75% of the students are passing.
And
I
what
forget what
city?
year this is from. And almost not even 5% are proficient in math.
Wow.
Right? You see this, I mean, this is we're taking blood work now. We are getting the report back from the blood and urine analysis. And you can see, and then here, these two bottom schools, Scripps Ranch and University
Yeah, I was gonna say
City.
shout out to Scripps at least. I mean, at least they
Well,
started.
yeah,
at
but these
63.
are also, I mean, these are the college preps, the Skylines, I mean, they're public schools, but they're in much more high income, affluent areas. And so that's what you see. You can actually see the gap right there, right? These are not schools in Southeast San Diego. And we can just go across to the next one. This is math. Now we're looking at ELA. Again, look at the one outlier here, Lincoln High School, right?
Jeez, boy.
Almost 85% of students. And this is great. This is a great visualization too, because you can click on it and it pulls it up. It tells you what you're looking at. There's a 62.91 difference between grades and the assessments, right? Look at that.
I have a theory on this stuff, man. I have a theory. When you stop out and after Omar goes, I'll wait. But yeah, I have a theory on this stuff.
And we'll look at one more. Hoover's also in a kind of a low income, very diverse neighborhood. San Diego. This is the School for the Performing Arts, I think, has pretty big gaps. And then let's look at, I think the other subject is science, I think. Yeah. And again, the gaps are pretty.
Lincoln giving out them A's, boy. They
like candy, man. Yeah. I mean, good question, Alonzo. But yeah, I think that's what we're going to get into right now. But I think this is fascinating. It's obviously not a good promotional tool for the school district, but it's exactly what we're talking about. This is only what the data says. This is teacher reported grades. So what teachers are saying about their students' proficiency versus what some would call, a subjective, I would say an objective assessment says about a student's proficiency. And with that, let's jump into some discussion. That was a lot.
Yeah, man. I'll give Omar first crack if he wants it.
Oof. I don't know, man. Like Conrad said it best, man. It's a real pisser, dude. So for those of us on the podcast, dude, what we're seeing is that we saw a chart, and ultimately you're seeing the results of the state test on the left and the grades on the right. And there's like one school where like 5% of the kids passed the state test, but then it's like the kids were getting basically like 70s and passing grades.
Yeah.
I can say this, man, like there is a lot of questions coming into this podcast that we had for ourselves. And Alonzo asked the question, like, what contributed to these test results? And like, I can tell you like 5 quick things, because it was the 5 things that I wrote down. It was like, 1, this is what happens when you don't have proficiency-based grading. When grading is super subjective and you're just straight up like giving out grades for, kindness and effort versus actual proficiency, it begs the question of like, what are you teaching? And is what you're teaching important? And how are you assessing that importance? And like, clearly you're not, right? The second question, like, is like classroom management. So like, how many of these teachers are dealing with kids that are just like perpetually on the phone? And then how much of these teachers are actually building meaningful relationships with these kids? And are they within a system that allows them to build meaningful relationships with these kids? When you're in a high school and you've got 40 kids in a classroom and you only see them once a day, how do you set that system up to build meaningful relationships with them? You don't. And I taught my high school just like that.
And or schools where, teachers barely see their kids that aren't even showing up, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Because like, you talked to, I can skip to like chronic absenteeism. That was one of our questions and one of our concerns. And my question is like, if kids are not coming to the school, Teachers and administrators are often like, well, there's nothing I can do about it. And I'm like, there's everything you can do about it. Because my major question is like, what's in it for the kid? That is the question that has literally been echoing across the halls of El Paso Leadership Academy for the last several months. As kids are moving towards not only chronic absenteeism across the nation, but going into like homeschools, I am constantly asking the question, what's in it for the kid? What is in it for this kid to come to this school? What are we doing that's so fun, so cool, so remarkable that they don't have an alternative outside of this school? So if we're doing fun project-based learning and advisories where kids are building relationships and getting to talk about social emotional issues, and at the same time doing very rigorous literacy work where kids are actually jumping 3 grade levels a year and learning how to read and feeling great about themselves, that is a very clear answer to what's in it for them. And you're not going to get that at other places. But if teachers are dealing with schools and it's like, well, like, all I'm here to do is teach world geography to these 45 kids. What can I do other than teach world geography? Again, that goes into like, well, what is the organization of your school that is creating a place where kids feel safe, seen, and are actually learning? Kids like to learn, man. Kids actually like to learn. If they're sitting in some boring ass class, dude, you're not answering the question about what's in it for them. You know, we talk about communications, like how are we communicating with these kids? I ask, like, what's the system to build a relationship with a kid? That's why advisory is such a huge component for me, because advisory is that one place where kids come every single day to build a relationship with those other kids and that teacher. And that advisory teacher is purposely meeting parents and purposely working with these kids and purposely advising them year after year. So like for our audience, imagine if your kid was in the 6th grade and they had this advisory teacher, and this teacher was like, I think David, your last middle school, did your kid have an advisory like this?
Yep.
They had like small learning communities, right?
I was gonna say you didn't finish describing the advisory class. You was like in the middle of describing it.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna ask if like David knew about it because he experienced it. But like imagine you're a parent and your kid's in 6th grade. And at most middle schools, you're just like, well, if something goes wrong, who the hell do I call? They got this teacher for English and this teacher for math, an assistant principal that doesn't know them, a principal that certainly doesn't know them, a counselor that's never seen them before. Imagine if your kid was with a teacher every single day for a period of time where that teacher is constantly working and advising them on their grades, getting to know them, building relationships with them, and then that teacher becomes your go-to. So you can call that teacher and find out how they're doing in every single one of their classes. You can call that teacher and find out how their behavior is going, because that teacher is fully responsible for that student and building a relationship with them. Now imagine if that was the same advisory teacher in 7th grade and now in 8th grade. Can you imagine the indelible relationship these kids would have with this teacher and with this parent, and the accountability this teacher would have to these kids? It's like, it's so easy for a teacher to dismiss a relationship with a child when it's like, I see this kid for 45 minutes once a day and I can't stand this kid, but it's just that one class. Now imagine if that kid's there every single day for 3 years. They may think twice about getting to know this kid and building that relationship with the kid and making sure that the kid does not slip through, you know, the safety net. This advisory is the safety net. So I've got a lot of answers, Alonzo, because this is how we built EPLA, because it really answers the question of like, how do schools change the way that they are organized and change the way that they do work to ensure that they're actually facilitating good learning for kids? And these are just a couple of strategies to answer your question in terms of the questions that we were asking ourselves about, like, how does this happen? And like,
I'll just jump in. I think like I do have a theory. I want to address what you were saying. I went to school like that. Emory was like that. We got into the academy. We had not only did we have the same, you know, homeroom or whatnot, we took all the same classes together throughout the day. So it's like a cohort motto. Now we did not get the benefits that you're speaking of. There was no like, you're calling that person is, I mean, they just weren't trained that way. That's more of a, you know, caseload social. I started my career as a social worker. That's how we do it as a social worker. And then in college, we had a similar situation where the first year we were in a pod together. They did it for a lot of Black and brown kids to kind of make sure that we, you know, got through. I think but I don't have a problem with that idea. I think that all of it takes some maintaining, all of it takes some supervision to make sure there's a modicum of quality being met. But I think in this situation, I think this is why I think that is such a disparity. I think that you could link, this is just a hypothesis, but I've seen this in Oakland, where that line is the longest and there's the biggest gap. I think you can link in a lot of behavioral problems. And I think that what happens when you have schools that have a lot of behavioral problems, you start being rewarded by grades for good behavior than you do for the actual work that you produce. So I think that is something that actually happens a lot. And I would love to see their discipline data, how, what that's like, or kind of be in there and get that vibe and get that feel. Listen, man, I think classes need to be audited. And I love where you're coming from, Omar, because you're talking about this as a school leader. I'm coming from it from a community agency side, as a parent, as a student. You have to go ask these questions. I don't care if you. So now we know that just having an A does not mean you are proficient. Grades do not equal proficiency. You have to ask the question, am I on grade level? And if that teacher can't give you an answer, then you need to escalate that. If you can't get an answer in a certain amount of time, that's, I think parents need to start asking that question, and again, it's hard to rewire parents' brains around this stuff, because my mother, who's not an educator, she's not Omar Yanar, she's not David Castillo, she's not Jubilee Ransom. All she was like, did you get your name on the board? Meaning, did you get in trouble or not? Did you get good grades? If you got good grades and you wasn't in disciplinary trouble, there's nothing sparking her to ask these additional questions. And what I'm telling the public, what I'm telling you as a citizen who is consuming this public good, you have to ask that question. Now, if Omar is your school leader, he's on his teachers, he's on his staff, David's on his teachers and his staff. If everybody is doing their job, think of it as the three branches of government. If everybody's doing what they're supposed to do and watchdogging each other, then that kid will benefit. But we see enough data from Oakland and San Diego that this is happening at a rapid, rancid pace. Like it is spoiled, man. It's terrible. And Lincoln, baby, I don't know what's happening with 3%.
So, yeah.
It's crazy. Go ahead, David. That line is crazy.
So I want to call our attention again to this. So this is data from 2022, 2023. This data, this is an 11th grade snapshot again of, on the left, where students are actually performing on an assessment, and on the right, the grades that they're getting. So we see significant gaps around. And so, yeah, I think you're right. It calls into question grading policies, right? Rigor with grading policies. A lot of these, even my kid's school system that he's in now, they don't even have a grading policy for his school or the district. Every teacher can just kind of do it how they want. But point being is, and now this is the bigger issue. I'm coming at it from, so Charles, you have your community activist hat on, right? Omar, you have your school leader hat on, and now I'm going to put my taxpayer hat on.
There you go.
Like what are we getting here, people? Like, what are our kids getting for the amount of money that's being spent on public education? And when families show up to these schools for promotional events and open houses, are they showing them the orange, or are they just talking about the blue?
Of course, right? They're talking about the blue. I mean,
and so this data has been around. This data started when these kids were in kindergarten, right? Of course, external factors, poverty, violence, crime, absenteeism. I get it. I understand all that. But it doesn't mean that we should lower the bar and just say, just because you have a pulse and you're not throwing chairs, I'm going to pass you in my class, right? Then let me show you two other things. So we talk about education on the show. And we also, there's this whole idea or this path, this thing that happens in education, and maybe only education, or maybe just in government. The longtime superintendent that just recently left San Diego Unified, you want to know where she ended up?
Where?
Oakland?
I was gonna say San Francisco, but
Washington, D.C.
Oh.
This is what happens. You get a promotion in these systems, right? You get promoted. You know, you look at that data and they're like, yeah, she's good. Let's move her up the chain, right? Wild. Okay, one more snapshot. I'm going to put people on blast today. And now, and
go ahead,
and
David.
The current superintendent of San Diego Unified. Ready?
Yep.
This guy under investigation right now. The district had to hire a $500 an hour law firm for they're investigating this guy for all kinds of like fraud now. So welcome to the Terror Dome.
Listen, man.
I gotta rewatch the Terror Dome, man. I gotta rewatch some.
I'm not making it up.
Shit.
No,
man,
not
like
attacking anybody.
Up, like,
it's
man,
crazy,
like
man.
we just had that happen in El Paso. Superintendent who was trying to flee from like $100 million budget deficit and all kinds of shady academic work, because the last superintendent got a $600,000 golden parachute after committing academic fraud because he was giving kids credit for courses that they weren't taking. And I mean him, like, you're like, well, how did the superintendent know about this? This was happening. He was the one that was directing these school leaders to do that, man, to basically do what Bill said, was to up the graduation rates, because parents were calling and like, this credit's bullshit. And he's like, whatever, just give them that credit. No one's ever going to know. So that guy got fired. And then the new superintendent came in and left with $100 million budget deficit, and he tried to flee to Arizona, and then Arizona found out about what was going on, so they rescinded their offer, and now he's under investigation, dude. And now Socorro is taken over by the state of Texas. I'm just like, gosh dang, dude, like I mean, this is like, when you ask these questions about who is like behind the wheel, these are just examples of like, how are kids going to learn when at the top they are corrupt, totally invested in their own promotion superintendents, or in the case of someone in like San Diego where like they're getting, you know, promoted to like the Department of Ed. I'm like, what good is that person going to do at the Department of Ed? Like, we get rid of the people who are doing exceptionally well instead of paying them better and putting them into a really comfortable position so that they stay, so that they can keep doing results and train the next group. Or we're dealing with these corrupt individuals. And then at the grassroots level, if it's corrupt at top, what do you think is happening in the schools, man?
Yeah, man.
I know we got happening with teachers and administrators.
I know we got to wrap.
Oakland, California they kicked out Antoine Wilson, right?
Well, Antoine got an offer, but it was going to be, they were trying to. I mean, he got an offer with DC, and he took it because it was going to probably get ugly. But listen, man, but I know we focused on trying to get kids proficient and reading those things. Look, I'm going to go a different direction with this. I think that we chose two random districts. I think this is happening everywhere. I think it is indicative. I think the topic that you all talked about last week is a result of this shit. Like, I think that like this is, you got a D or an F. How do we get you to a C? This is why I was so mad when, you know, Oakland usurped my Dump the D campaign, where it was supposed to hold the district and educators accountable, but it instead said, we're not going to give out D's. So if a kid is failing, we're basically going to push him into a C, which is I've never advocated for that bullshit. So, I mean, I think there's a trend here. How do you feel versus how well can you do? And I think that, you know, I'll just go back to my 8th, 9th grade PE class. Hey, man, you got to make this time to pass. There's no how you feel. Hey, if you can't run the laps in this time, you don't pass. You know what I'm saying? And like, you know, he would tell you that at the beginning of the school year, of the semester. And you basically have the whole semester to try to get there. Now, they would change it depending on your weight and sex and all that thing. But I like that, right? Because it was like, here's the goal. Here's what you got to meet. And either you're going to meet it or you're not. But we're hurting our society by doing this stuff. And you might feel okay as an adult in a moment. But those young people are going to feel some animosity later on. That's my final thought.
David, what you got, man?
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back to the maybe my angle here, so I don't repeat myself, is I appreciate the work that went into this the data analysis that went into the San Diego piece. I think media from every region should be doing the same. It requires that they go in and ask for. I think in order to get the grade data, they have to submit public information records requests or whatever. And that's what good journalism is. It's just putting out data and then let people decide. Right? We have an issue. We have a huge gap. I think you're right. If we looked at San Francisco, if we looked at Hayward, if we looked at El Paso, if we looked at any other big New York,
Chicago,
we'd see the same thing exactly. And so again, I think it's a systemic issue. People don't want to look. They don't want to look at the blood work results, right? And I think we have to, because if we don't, it's not really about any one individual that's like taking on, some kind of ailment or ignoring their health. We're talking about young people, right? And when we send young people out into the world unprepared for college, for community college, for four-year college, for the world of work that we talked about last year, the outcomes for children, for low income, Black and brown young people is very clear. And it's not just about living. It's not just about struggling, but oftentimes it's about getting involved in violence, incarceration, and or death. And that's the reality. That's what the data tells us. So, I appreciated this conversation.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think just my final comment is, and I've heard a lot of comedians talking about this, is like, look, you think back to like the 1980s, you think back to like the 1990s, or like my parents who were like they were immigrants on first generation. Like if I had a situation in school, and like I'm going to sound a little like Dr. Charles Cole with like my voice inclinations. By the way, we channeled you a lot last time, man. We missed you immensely on the show. We channeled you. So I could channel my Dr. Charles Cole today a bit. Is like, what the hell's going on with these parents? Like when I was in school, you get in trouble, parents looking at the kid wondering, what the hell did you do? Now parents looking at the teacher. And look, that's straight up true. Like going back to Omar Yanar, like when did this like weird shift in dichotomy happen where as a child in school, if there was something going wrong, parents looking at me, and it was a combined effort between teacher and parent to be like, what is going on with this kid? Because like, listen, man, like kids freaking lie, and they lie to get out of shit. And like, that is childhood. Does every child lie? No. Do most kids lie? Definitively, if they get in trouble. But it's always this like compact between the teacher and the parent to trying to figure out what's going on with a kid, because it's like we're in a combined role and goal to get this kid to the best situation that they're in. Right now, if you're looking at some root causes, there's a lot, but look at parents coming to all these board meetings and just like completely destroying the fabric of education because of feelings and not because of proficiency, which is what really like David and Doc have been saying this whole time. So much is led by feelings instead of facts and data. Then that translates to these superintendents and these principals and these teachers that are just giving good grades because they don't want these angry parents coming after them and their jobs. And that's a huge root cause of this scenario, is like how much of this is the fear from parents or from adults fearing parents and basically saying, we're just going to give these great grades and get these kids through because we don't want to deal with these parents, as opposed to this like combined ideology of if the parent and the teacher are not working in unison for the improvement of the child, you're causing civil war. And you know what kids are really good at? Getting mom and pop to come against each other. Get the teacher and the parent to come against each other. Because if they're against each other, they're no longer focused on the kid. They're focused on this other issue. So I'd say one of the major issues that we need to think about is A, combining parents and teachers, B, getting proficiency-based grading into the fold as just a standard practice, but C, like for all these superintendents and principals, man, it's like they always tout the results of their rich schools and try to bury the results of the low income schools. And I'm like, where's the superintendent that's one day going to stand up to parents and be like, your kids are going to be good and the budget of your rich school will be okay, but we have got to start allocating resources to the low income schools and doing immense amount of work there that your kids may not need, but these kids desperately need. Like, you may not need a tutor, but these kids do. And that's the kind of formula, because if you're going to be hiding shit away from the public in terms of your results, like, honestly, how long are we going to play this game? Because ultimately, your hiding is going to cause economic disaster. Because how is the workforce going to survive with illiterate children? And then you're just setting these kids up for failure and poverty. Like, I don't know, man. Like, shame on you.
Yeah, we already
So
there.
that's
man.
my last take on that, man. Yeah, hell yeah. And
Well, look,
right.
great
That
show,
ain't right,
fellas.
man.
Great topic. And for the record, I'm supposed to be down here on this water. I got.
Man, you gotta drink that shit.
It's just
You
a
gotta
lot of
drink
this.
that shit, baby.
I can't do it, man. I don't. That Jewel wanted to be here. She couldn't make it, but hopefully y'all will see her next week. That's Omar. That's David. I am Charles. We will see you all next week. Same bat time, same bat station. Y'all be smooth and take care of yourselves and each other. Peace out.